Latino apologetics, specifically within the Protestant context, and we're talking primarily now, English dominant, because this is the situation we're rising upon. So, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, even though I have a New York Yankees hat on. Hey, all Italians at some point wear a Mets or a Yankees hat, okay? Well, this is an important issue. I'm not acting like I'm the master on it, but living in Phoenix for over 2 decades, I've learned a little thing or two, and I put together some research that I would now like to share with you. So let's take a look at something I've written up that we're going to go through called Integrating Apologetics into an Inner City Latino Church in Phoenix. But we're really going to dive deep into this, and I think you guys are going to appreciate this. There's a lot here, and the thing is that it deals with the church in general, and it also deals with contextual apologetics in general. So no matter where you're at, this is relevant to you. Now, first, I want to start with giving a brief history of Latino Protestants in the United States of America. Because I mentioned being part Italian already in the beginning of the show. Historically, when people thought of Italians, when they thought of Irish, they thought of Roman Catholicism, especially when it was with first, second, even third generation. And that's in almost everyone's background. When we talk about Latino populations, we're talking about the colonial project of Spain. The dominant religion at that time was Roman Catholicism in Spain, and they transferred this religion, in essence, to their territories. So what about Latino Protestants, though? Well, let's give a little bit of a brief history. Now, here's how it goes. I've actually dug into some records on this a little bit. The Texas State Historical, you can see the website there. It's the Texas State Historical Association, and it's in, there's a URL there. It's footnote 3, Mexican American Presbyterians. They report that as early as 1830, a few missionaries individually distributed Spanish tracts and Bibles and opened small schools to promote the cause of Protestant Christianity. This was kind of informal ministry, and it became difficult because there were Spanish statutes. Now I'm quoting from a resource written by William Stewart Redd, who wrote in 1936 a history of the Presbyterian Church in Texas. Here's what he said. Spanish statutes barring Protestant ministers and church services from Mexican territory prevented any serious effort to supply that destitution with Presbyterian ministers until the spring of 1834. So that's kind of when we start rolling, as it were. Now, here he is, and he's an interesting fellow because he did a number of works and research that had to do with Presbyterianism in the Southwest. Another book he had was called A History of the Presbyterian Church in Texas. And he also had, I already mentioned that one. He had another one called The Texas Colonist and Religion, 1821 to 1836, and he wrote that in 1924. So, interesting fellow here. Shout out to Yandel, my man. That is Alan Torres, who is a very faithful supporter of this show, and I always appreciate seeing her around no matter what the case is. And let me give you a little bit of this. Thanks for keeping it going, brother. I hope the show blesses you. Shout out to D New as well. Everybody else in the live chat. Okay, so there were restrictions originally from any kind of serious effort in that area of the country. This is in the 1830s. Now, what happened is there was a thing called the Texas Revolution. A lot of people don't realize that for part of its history, Texas was its own independent, sovereign country or nation, the Lone Star State. This is where the story of the Alamo comes into play. Now, all of this is controversial because it deals with manifest destiny and all of this kind of stuff. Look, I'm going to give you a pop culture friendly reference for this. Is it exactly historical accurate? No, but it is on the History Channel, but that's not saying a lot. But nonetheless, if you want to kind of ease yourself into this, let me recommend a mini-series called Texas Rising. It's got some big stars in it, as you can see, and it's pretty interesting. And also, the last Alamo movie they did, now I'm not talking about the John Wayne one from the 60s, I'm talking about the one in the 2000s. It was not bad, and it included a lot of this, and the acting was fine, and it was more historically accurate by far than the John Wayne rendition. So if you want a movie, then check out Alamo. I think it came out in 2006 or something like that. Texas Rising also is about some of this. So these are some sort of pop culture. And if you're like me, what you do is you look at your phone or iPad or laptop and you check out the things to find out what's true and what's not true when you're doing it, you know? What's going on?
The foot chair.
The what?
The,
Why?
so people can sit.
Okay. All right, so here we go with the Texas Revolution loosening some of these restrictions because they had basically declared themselves independent of Mexico at this point. Now, how did that work out? Well, originally, Mexico said, hey, these areas are ours, and we've got some citizens there, but they couldn't really control those areas because they were previously claimed by Spain. And basically, Mexico said, well, now that we've got our independence, these are our areas, but hey, you guys can move on in here. You just got to swear allegiance to Santa Anna. So they did. But what happens is they swore allegiance essentially to a form of kind of a constitution. But Santa Anna ripped that up and declared himself a dictator. He viewed himself in what's sometimes called Napoleon of the West. And this came at the same time the Texans, and sometimes some of the residents are actually even called Texicans, wanted more independence. And so this is where you get the Texas Revolution. Now, obviously, there was a massive slaughter at the Alamo, but that wasn't the end. Ultimately, the Texans won. They got their independence. So this enabled a new part of what is now the United States of America to be open for some missionary activity. Now, there was about 100,000 Mexican Catholics, according to all the stats that I've been able to look at. 100,000 Mexican Catholics who were in these areas that are Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, you understand, Nevada, California. About 100,000 Mexican Catholics, and they basically became United States citizens instantly. And this happened after the next thing, which was the Mexican-American War, where the United States took control of what had been declared to be at least about half of Mexico's territory. Now, all this is complicated, but either way you look at it, the fact is, as far as for evangelical Christianity, the results of the Texas Revolution initially, and then the Mexican-American War, which is over in 1848. I think Taylor was the guy in charge of that. This opened up a new mission field for gospel expansion. And so you had a couple small scattered mission efforts. Now, again, I am not talking about Roman Catholicism. I'm talking about Protestant Christianity here. Okay, so this is why this is kind of a different thing, because usually you just think of, well, okay, let's go back to the Spaniards. Well, you're going to go back to the 1500s. But if you're talking about let's go with the Protestants, you're going to be more talking about the 1800s. And that's where my interest lies in as a Protestant evangelical myself. A couple books I'm going to recommend on this. This is actually, if you want a real history book for the United States of America that actually takes religious factors into consideration. These are historians and excerpts of religion. This cannot be beat. I got this from the seminary library, so I haven't bought this yet, but man, I'm really liking it. It's called Unto a Good Land. Excellent book, and it covers this stuff, and I find it to be very helpful. It's not my only source, as you can tell by the bottom, but that's one thing I recommend. Every source I cite doesn't mean I agree with it, but you also have a book, C'est la Luz, The Making of Mexican Protestantism in the American Southwest. That's footnote 8. Making Good Citizens Out of the Mexicans, Motivations for Protestant Missions Work Among Mexican Americans. Interesting, regardless of what you agree or don't agree with. And there's some other stuff there at the bottom that could be helpful for you to study further as well. Well, eventually you had a small gathering of local Mexican converts. These are Protestants now. They formed a home prayer group That became something called Iglesia, no, I don't have good Spanish pronunciation, Metodista de Peralta, which it's a Methodist church. So I've cited some Presbyterian sources here, but that's a Methodist church that we're talking about, a Methodist Episcopal church specifically. And the way it happened was Ambrosio Gonzalez, he was inspired by a Bible that he'd been gifted. And again, notice that you have Protestants giving away Bibles. He converted to Protestantism in a place called Peralta, New Mexico. And by 1855, Methodist missionary Dallas Lorre had organized a congregation of 14 Mexican converts, led by Gonzalez, the first such Latino Protestant church in Peralta. Now, I would like to go to Peralta, New Mexico, and maybe do a video on this sometime. This particular church, my understanding, is not still there, this particular exact church. However, there are still churches there in Peralta, New Mexico. And this is sort of the beginning, 1855, as far as official organized of the Latino Protestant church in the United States of America. Later on, you had American Baptists, I've already mentioned the Presbyterians, Congregational Church, and a number of others who joined the pioneering missions work of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And the result was, quote, that according to the reports of the Protestant churches, in 1900 there are 5,572 active members and 149 Latino congregations in Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and California. So notice, that's pretty good growth. And under 50 years, that's going from 14 people to over 5,000 people, 149 Latino congregations of Protestants. So that's a fascinating thing, don't you think? I find that fascinating. And this is really the beginning of something that, again, is not talked about. People a lot of times just think of Catholics and things like that, but let's not just think about that. By the way, there's a good little article in Christianity Today. I can't usually recommend them anymore, but it's called Early Protestant Work in Peralta. And that's the work that they cited. And the actual article is called The First Mexican Protestant Loved the Bible. Great little insight into this. Now, a number of times I'm going to be citing this book right here for this part of the presentation. And you guys, when I get to the stats on this, I think you will understand how important this is to understand some of this background, because I don't think people realize the stats on this. Los Evangelicos. Great book. I love this book. No book's perfect, but it's called the Evangelicals, basically. Portraits of Latino Protestantism in the United States, with in stock Juan Martinez, Lindy Scott. This has been a very helpful book with a lot of information, very helpful. Well, that's what we have. Now, this is all before the 1900s. Now, what happens next? Grant Scott, shout out to you. He says, Unto a Good Land, because I saw your comment when you were referring to it. A History of the American People sounds like a good book. It is. I got to return it to the seminary library. And that's why I got my shirt on today, because I borrowed their books. This book also is out of their library. So these are books I would like to have, but use the library sometimes, because that's what libraries are for. Now, something came called the Azusa Street Revival. The Azusa Street Revival. If you grew up charismatic, like I did, then what we have is we have a situation where we've heard about Azusa Street. A lot of you who grew up in other spots maybe didn't hear about Azusa, but Azusa was a big deal for us as charismatics, all right? And it lasted from 1906 to 1909. It was in Los Angeles, and it was multicultural. This is the igniting spark for the modern Pentecostal movement. There was some stuff before, but this is like the big match, you know? Mexicans were there. They were present and involved. We have names even in early scant, but we do have these records that still exist, of early street preachers such as Obundio and Rosa Lopez. Other people who were early in this, Brigidio Perez, Luis Lopez, Francisco Lorente. And we have ministers such as Juan Navarro Martinez. They were all involved, though, the people I just mentioned, in the Apostolic Assembly, which unfortunately became a non-Trinitarian oneness group. So here's the thing. Early in the days of the Pentecostal movement, there was a split, and the splits happened in multiple ways in various places. Some of the splits, unfortunately, were involved with racism, where initially there was black and white, mixture, and of course, a lot of the white folks ended up not being able to abide by that, and so you have these splits out from COGIC to AG. I know I'm using acronyms for denominations here. But you also had the AG had to kick out the non-Trinitarians, and they were in general removed out, and that's where you get the UPC and all this kind of stuff. Grant says, I went to an all Spanish-speaking Pentecostal church for a few months. I went to a bilingual Arabic church, and I don't speak Arabic, but this makes me think you speak Spanish. Maybe you could help me with my pronunciation. I'd like to hear more about that, actually. So you do have some of that, and it's because you have this emphasis here on the tongues and the miraculous, but sometimes doctrine wasn't focused on yet, and so there was a problem with non-Trinitarians in the initial stages. But that's not all you had, because you also have key figures that were active in the more orthodox Trinitarian Assemblies of God. That's the AG. And you have missionaries to Latino people, Henry Ball, Alice Luce. And then later on, you have organizational leaders. Now we're moving away from the very early days and getting into another spot. Francisco Demetrio, Jose Giron. These are AG organizational leaders. Okay, you got an earpiece. And that's how you learn some Spanish. 2,000 people. That's fascinating. Tama Toa says, I'm talking about the children of the Vatican. That's an interesting comment. I'd love to hear more about your comment there. Tell me what you mean by that. Now, the Pentecostal and charismatic movements still have a prominent role within Latino Protestant Christianity. So these days, it's not just really about, Roman Catholicism. When we talk about Latino Christendom in the United States, we're also going to be talking about charismatics and Pentecostals. An example of this is Victory Outreach. Some of you guys know about Victory Outreach, some of you don't. I've been able to be involved with Victory Outreach for a number of things and have enjoyed many experiences there at VO, as we call it. I have a lot of friends who are involved with VO in various ways, and they've done a lot with hip-hop. T-Bone was associated with Victory Outreach. Recently, you did have Sonny Arganzoni pass away, kind of the founder, and they go way back, more prominent on the West Coast, but they're in the East Coast too. I think that's Sonny Arganzoni in one of their first outreaches, and really went into the Vadios in the day where that wasn't being done, and reached people who needed radical gospel message and radical change, and they operate men's homes and urban leadership institutes and all kinds of other things to this day. But when you're talking about Latino charismatics, they do encompass a wide spectrum of variety. Now, by the way, I forgot to mention, but it's on the screen, and I need to put it in the live chat. Oops, sorry. You can call in if you want to be part of this show. So if you want to jump on this show, I do have the button open for you to be a guest. So with a lot of the shows lately, I've been kind of combining a smoke room format with it. So if you want to jump on and be part, I just dropped it in the live chat, and I'm going to pin it. Okay, so you can see everything of what we're talking about here. And I encourage you to consider coming in, and if not, at least hit that like button and make sure that you answer the poll, which is, how many Latino Christian apologists can you name? Be honest. 1 to 2, 0, 3 plus, or do Catholics count? I thought that'd be funny to put in there. Some people were like, well, what's your answer? We'll get to that. Okay, so continuing on here. Yeah, that's right. COGIC is Church of God in Christ to those who do not know, but now you do. This is just introducing and stuff. Now, more recently, you have more broadly evangelical denominations who have grown in their Latino inclusion, for lack of a better word, such as EV Free. That's Evangelical Free Church. Good denomination, in my opinion. Now, there's even Protestant scholars of Latino background. So again, I'm focusing on U.S.-based Latino Protestantism, okay? And they've produced a small but steady supply of relevant resources for and about what is sometimes called the Brown Church. There's even a book with that title. Now, that book in particular is way too moderate for my taste in a lot of its approaches, but the introduction I thought was helpful, and some of the information is helpful, even though I think the book is riddled with presuppositional errors. And I'm not saying they don't have a good heart or anything like that, the author and the contributors to the book. But nonetheless, I understand the idea of the Brown Church. It was more the book I was talking about that I got that from. Now, let's talk about how to serve this group of people who are very, very important and becoming more and more important as time goes on. Now, first we need to get some numbers to do that. So let's look at some numbers, and I am gonna bust out with a few graphs here. All right. So, in the United States of America, the most recent stats that I see from the U.S. Census Bureau are that we have 65.2 million Latinos in the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, that is almost 20% of the total U.S. population. That is significant. This is the largest so-called, as these terms are used, minority in the United States of America. It's the biggest. Now, it's broadly diverse because this is including Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, people from Ecuador. You understand? It's including all that. So these categories are kind of odd and fuzzy. Nonetheless, you have 19.5% of the pop. This is going to be higher and higher. By 2050, you're talking a third of the U.S. population, according to most projections that I've seen. Now, that's important to understand, don't you think? Don't you think that this is relevant information? Do you understand that it's going down? Yeah, you know what I mean? It's going down. You can't ignore this, folks. Now hold on, I got a couple graphs I want to try to bring into the discussion here. Where did my graphs go? I had a couple graphs here that I want to show that I organized, that I threw in here, but where did my graphs go? Where could they be? Come on, graphs. Is this one of my graphs I was talking about? I don't think there's one of my graphs. Well, where I'm having trouble finding my graphs, people. Having trouble finding my graphs. They're right here. My graphs are right here, man. Okay, well, I am gonna get them because I have a way to do this. But since that's what's happening, let me real brief throw some other resources at you as well that I've been poking around and looking around. That I'm gonna recommend why I go and find my graphs. This is me at the seminary library. I already mentioned Los Evangelicos, and I mentioned Unto a Good Land. But also, because if you're wondering where I'm getting some of this information, here's this book right here at the top, Protestantes, subtitled Hispanic Christianity Within Mainline Traditions, David Maldonado, Abingdon Press. That's that one. And then the red one with the gold writing. Now, this is mainstream. This is not exactly evangelical, but it is Protestant, understand? That one is Hispanic Christianity Within Mainline Protestant Traditions, a bibliography. So Barton and Maldonado have actually culled together like every resource. It's quite impressive. Now, this is a little more tangential related to it, but nonetheless, I did get it. There's some stuff that was insightful, specifically one chapter called Evangelicals and Empire, Christian Alternatives to the Political Status Quo. And it gets into what you might call global Christianity, which is important in this discussion. And then the other book there that has the glare on it, that's The Church in Latin America, 1492 to 1992, edited by Enrique Dussel. Now, that one does get into more of the Roman Catholic element. It only has a little bit on Protestants, but some other resources that I wanted to show you, so you can this is something you can look at, yourself if you should desire. Let me see if this is going to let me drag this graph over here. Okay, it does. Okay, excellent. But I'm not ready to. I'm actually not ready to exactly use that one just yet. I'm going to though. Don't worry. Okay. All right, so let's temporarily put this off here. Now, back to the stats, and a lot of this is from Pew Research and the U.S. Census Bureau, okay? This is where, and it's almost all sourced. You can see it right up there. So again, almost 20%, understand, of the U.S. population, Latino. Out of that, 21% of Latino adults identify as Protestant. That's 15% evangelical, 6% mainline. So the way that this is kind of is parsed out is Protestant would be everybody from the Presbyterians to most, well, these days it's different, man. Okay, certain Presbyterians, charismatic Pentecostals, and those who would affirm things like the five solas, those who would, in general, affirm inerrancy, the early ecumenical creeds, those who, in some way, are more moderate to conservative in ethics and politics, for example. When you get into mainline, that's PCUSA. That's the Presbyterian Church United States of America, not the PCA, which is smaller but much more conservative compared to the PCUSA, which is experiencing massive problems. For example, Southern Baptist, that's evangelical. But then when you get into mainline, that's the Episcopalians. That's a lot of forms of Anglicanism. These days, it's a lot of the Methodists. The larger, bigger, more established ones with an American history that tend to have their own buildings, usually somewhat more historic, versus the storefront or the warehouse or the box or the converted this or that, okay? There's different ways to suss out. But anyways, this is the Protestant breakdown. So about 15% would be evangelical. Within that, you got to understand, you're getting a lot of that would be charismatic and Pentecostal. Not all, but a lot. But this amounts to about 13.7 Latino Protestants. That's significant. Now, Kojic itself, Church of God, it's almost that size. Last I checked. And this has to do primarily with religious identification, because understand there are now more Latinos in America than there are black Americans, but there's more black Protestants than there are Latino Protestants, understand? But I hold that those equations are going to change. Wendelin says, living in New Mexico, the predominant race might be Hispanic Latino with Spanish, South American, Native Americans, and whites, very mixed here. Yeah, so Wendelin, you're in New Mexico. I'll be curious what city you're in. Very similar to Phoenix and very similar to Arizona. What you just said is pretty much our situation too. Exactly. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Some differences, obviously, especially based upon the tribes and whatnot. So we got 13.7 million Latino Protestants. The share within, those who identify as Latino has held relatively stable, about 21%. All right. Now, let me show you a little bit about that real quick here. Let me see here. I'm going to show that in a second. Yes, Latino, but I'll just wait on that for just a second. Okay. Now, a 2022 Pew report indicates that 43% of Latino adults are Catholic. So this is current we're talking about, understand? That is down, though. That's why I brought up the Protestants holding relatively stable. In 2010, Pew reported that out of Latino adults, 67%. This is only in a decade and a couple years, y'all. 67% were, at that time, Roman Catholic. Now, I understand that what I'm focusing on here is Protestant evangelical. However, this is also important to understand the breakdown of U.S. Latino religious identification, because in 12 years, you had a massive shift. Massive shift. Notice the orange there, that the Protestant holds relatively stable. The mid-orange. The lighter orange with kind of the tinge of yellow, that's the Catholic percentage. It's dropped radically. They're becoming de-churched. For this example, I'm counting Roman Catholicism. Now, what's that red one? What's the red one? Any guesses what the red one is? It's none. Unidentified. Unaffiliated. No organization. No title. That's interesting. Now, why would that be? How do you come in And you have this strong percentage of Catholics, and then within 12 years it shrinks down to that. A big explanation is the kids are becoming acclimated, they're assimilating, but what are they assimilating to? They're not assimilating into Protestantism, they're assimilating into a secular American culture. This is not good. This is not good. It's not a good thing that they're assimilating into a secular American culture. Now, what we want to see is the percentage increase of Latino Protestants. There is a little bit of that. This is what's called religious switching. And notice in those very first initial congregations way back in the 1850s that I mentioned, most of them came out of Mexican Catholicism. Religious switching among Latinos is often away from Catholicism. It's not always to Protestantism. Sometimes it is, but more often, as I just showed, it's to no religious affiliation at all. Now I'm going to read a paragraph from the Pew Research that's significant. Shout out to Truth Defenders. He says, I was a Mexican apologist until I wasn't. Well, you're still one of my favorite Mexican apologists, no matter what you say, man. Okay, now let's read this. Pew Research. Pew Research is very good in general on religious stats and figures. Here's the quote. Fewer Latinos say they were raised with no religious affiliation. 13% of Latinos say they were raised with nothing. Then currently identify as unaffiliated, 30%. Now the reason for that is it's comparison. Who out of the Latino population was raised with no affiliation? About 13%. But who currently identify as unaffiliated? 30%. That's a 17% difference, you see. Continuing on. For every Latino raised without a religious affiliation who has joined a religion in adulthood, totaling 3% of all Latino adults. So they're not raised with a religious affiliation in this graph, or this paragraph that they're explaining. And then they join. That's about 3% of all Latino adults. So notice that's a much smaller trend. About 7 Latinos have left their childhood religion and become unaffiliated. So it's saying you have about 3% who are not raised with any religious affiliation, and then they join something. It's not even specifying what here. For every one of those, you've got 7 who leave their childhood religion, which is usually Catholicism, and become unaffiliated at all, 20%. So look, most Latinos are still Catholic. But the second largest religious group out of Latinos in the United States of America is Protestant. And we're looking at a situation where more and more young Latinos are becoming religiously unaffiliated. Why? They're assimilating into American culture. But American culture is not Christian. And yes, it's a Latino version of American culture, whatever all that means. Understand all this is wrought with imprecision. I understand that. Nonetheless, it's a secular culture. That's the key point here. It's a secular culture. It's not a Christian culture. It's not even a Catholic culture. So when you look at 2022, religious affiliation of U.S. Latinos by age, in the 18-29 bracket, if you had to guess, what do you see with the red? That's none. No identification. Notice it's the younger. It's the young millennial and those after them. 30 to 49, what do you have there? And notice how the orange is relatively stable. Now it shrinks with the younger demographic because the orange is us. That's the Protestants. The Catholic is higher in the 30 to 49, and the none is lower. Then when you get to 50 plus, look at how high Catholicism is for U.S. Latinos. Way up there. And the nuns and the Protestants are almost equal. The Protestants are actually higher slightly in that demographic than the nuns. This is important because you can't just start thinking, oh, Roman Catholic equals, Mexican equals Roman Catholic. No, doesn't, especially with the younger. They're having the same nun affiliation like everybody else. But yet you have a massive growing demographic, and guess what? Everyone thinks it's immigration. If you look at the stats, how is the Latino population increasing? In the United States of America, it's by birth in the United States of America. And it's not only, someone's like, it's daisy chaining and gets into a whole thing. No, the stats don't bear that out. I'm not saying immigration has no relevance and that never happens. My point is, more and more people have lived here for a while. They're having kids. They're not born outside the United States. They're born here. And that's the primary way you're getting more of that population. Now, let's look a little bit about that here with this graph, okay? This is important stuff. Let's look at the religious affiliation of U.S.-born versus foreign-born Latinos now, okay? So religious affiliation there. I'm going to leave it like that. Okay. So when you talk about those who are foreign-born, somewhere besides the United States, that's the darker orange. Notice how high Catholicism is there. It's lower among U.S.-born Latinos. And again, fascinating. The Protestant share is almost the same. You guys see that? When you talk about U.S.-born, when it comes to Protestantism, it's almost the same. Catholicism is only slightly higher. This is according to 2022 Pew Research. The nuns, though, when you talk about U.S.-born, it's way higher than it is with foreign-born Latinos who are nuns. Now, what's interesting is a lot of the Protestants, from the research I've been doing, they don't come from Mexico. A lot of Protestants come from other Central and South American countries, such as Ecuador or whatnot. Fascinating, right? Wendell's in Albuquerque. You may have told me that before. I apologize if I forgot. Okay. So, more and more young Latinos are becoming religiously unaffiliated. Nuns are those who describe themselves. This is what the nun is, according to demographers and researchers. Atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. In 2010, 10% of Latinos were nuns. In 2013, only 3 years later, 18% of Latinos were nuns. Now the number is 30%. 30%. Bruh. Let me see. Let's look at this. An opinion. USO Thomas says, take away the welfare granted. They go back to their own country. This year we are leaving U.S. because Trump will revoke citizenships. Trump is revoking citizenships? You're saying people that already are citizens of the United States, he's revoking them? This is really news. I don't know if that's right information, is what I'm trying to say. If I understand what you're saying, Trump is going to de-citizen people who are actually citizens of the United States of America, he's going to make them not citizens anymore? That doesn't sound right. This sounds like a conspiracy theory. One we've heard before. Unless I'm misunderstanding you, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. I don't actually agree. The reason why most Central and South Americans, because that's who we're talking about here, are here because there's social programs in the United States. I don't actually agree with that. This is more anecdotal, but what I've seen is people don't come over here from Central and South America to get a handout. In general, that's not why they're here. They want to do better, and so they're willing to work, and guess what they do? They work. Now, do some of the social programs help? Yes, and does the United States have to look at entitlements across the board, not just for immigrants, but the United States, because of our deficit, because of our massive debt, or rather, deficit in another sense, but our massive debt needs to look at entitlements. That's the only way to really make a dent in our problem here. That's a different issue. But I'm going to say anecdotally, people are not here from Central and South America because they got a bunch of entitlements. I just don't agree with that. I think they're here to work hard and make do with what they have. And then they'll pull together with their family and they're going to make it happen. And by the third generation, they're going to be part of the middle and upper middle class. Not that that's what it's all about, but unfortunately, by that same generation, they're no longer identifying with any religion up to the tune of 30%. 30%. Yeah, that would be cool, Wendell, if you went to Peralta. Now, this is not good news. Me, I'm a pragmatist in some ways. If I have a choice between a country filled with Roman Catholics and a country filled with nuns, I'm going to choose Roman Catholics every single time, unless there's some kind of special nuns. And it's funny to say nuns in contrast to Roman Catholicism because this is N-O-N-E-S, ladies and gentlemen. I don't mean a giant convent, okay? Also, it seems, from what I understand, the likelihood of religious switching to evangelical Protestant Christianity is higher amongst those who are Catholic than it is amongst the nuns. So this is how I'm looking at it now. Matthew says a lot of Mexicans are Catholic. Yeah, that's some of the stats we were going over. I know we got people just now joining, which is totally cool. And we are talking about Latino apologetics and the Latino church, getting into some stats here. This relates to urban and contextual apologetics, and this relates to the future of the United States, not just in places like where I live in the Southwest, but all across the United States of America. When I go back home to Columbus, now the West Side is filled with Chicanos. Not only, but when I was growing up, that's what it wasn't that. You mainly had scattered Puerto Ricans here or there. It's a different day. And I double-checked. Oh, it just undid my paper. He said I double-checked it's still in the talks. Okay, well, I'd have to really look at the talks because who's talking about it? Revoking citizenship. So I'm going to say that's not going to happen. Most Americans do care about fairness and de-citizening people, basically. It's not fair, if that's what we're talking about here. Anyways, coming back to this. So, nuns are increasing, especially amongst young Latinos in that 18 to 29 bracket, and I showed you that earlier. All right, we show them. You have an increasing number of younger U.S.-born Latinos who are losing their faith. Now, I do write as a fully committed Protestant evangelical, so that's not what I lay that on the table, but I try to kind of look at some of that together as far as the idea of Christendom, as it might be called. Now, a few interesting things I want to draw here. This Pew Research Center article for 2023, it's good. It's called Among U.S. Latinos, Catholicism Continues to Decline, but is still the largest faith. I mean, the headline tells you everything, but the stats and the numbers are actually good. And so I encourage you to check that out. And you also have actually some good stuff by the National Park Service on some of this stuff. And I have the link right there. And it's interesting, you know, we covered Protestant and we covered mainline and evangelical split. We covered Roman Catholicism. We covered nuns. Well, that's not 100%. What about everybody else? The stats I've seen show about 3 to 4% of Latinos are in other religions. Usually these other religions are sometimes thought of to be alternative Christian religions. Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and now these days even some form of Hebrew roots or Hebrew Israelism. You have about 1%, according to the stats that I've seen, who are affiliated with some kind of world religion besides Christianity, such as Islam. There is a growing Latino Islam practice. Practically, when you get into Latino spirituality, and these are very broad brushing categories, I apologize. They're not limited, though, in the practice to define boundaries. You have these syncretist things where you have indigenous spiritualities, and they might include something like Santeria and versions of folk Catholicism, and even versions of different versions of what sometimes people call voodoo and other spiritualities. These are mixtures going on. Not these things are prominent, but the stats don't bear those out as being all that significant in some ways as far as U.S. So here's the question. How do we strengthen the faith commitment of U.S.-born Latinos? What I'm going to suggest is apologetics, duh. Not the only thing, but a thing. A big thing. Shout out to Nate 2D2 coming through. You get the special sound, my brother. So what we need is a relevant apologetics teaching ministry. And I'm going to look at some ideas within what would be called an inner city Latino church, which is what I attend. I'm going to contend that greater theological depth and apologetics competency are key elements in strengthening and growing U.S. Latino Christianity. So we're going to look at how to have a culturally contextualized apologetics and theology ministry that addresses faith challenges, but also recognizes the unique cultural features of Latino communities, such as family-centered values and religious backgrounds that often involve Roman Catholicism or Pentecostalism. So that's what we're going to take a look at here. Okay. Now here's some suggestions as we look into this at the intersection of Latino cultural features and how it intersects with apologetics. Let's take a look here, all right? So, when we combine family integration and apologetics encounters, we might get some good results. So here's what I say. There's a need to create opportunities for families to encounter apologetics and theology together. Usually when people think about apologetics, this is not a usual consideration, all right? But in ministry of this kind of context, it should be. Now, this is going back 10 years, but in Maryville, which is the area my church is located in, businesses know this. Back in 2015, the Arizona Republic interviewed Zeke Valenzuela. He's a Desert Sky mall manager. And he told a reporter, quote, Hispanics shop as families, not just mom and pop, it's grandpas, grandmas, uncles, and all of that. So you have to create an ambiance where entire families come together, end quote. Now, that's less true than it was, but it's not done away with. So we need to figure out ways to apply the truth of the importance of family to apologetics encounters, not just the young college men who are interested or something like that, or the middle-aged guys who are interested. No. So how do we do that? I'm going to suggest one way is to use more and more homes. Yes, houses, apartments, domiciles, residences, for use because they're more family friendly. It's not just walking into a building. It's one family and another family. Mi casa, su casa. Seriously. The family's important, so an excellent approach is to let the family even teach the family. I'm going to get more to mi casa, su casa later. And so how do you let the family teach the family? Well, first, you've got to have people in the family that can teach apologetic and theologically geared things. So that means we need to find ways to train those in the family who have a voice, who are interested in this kind of thing, and give them real-life pragmatic training about how to teach their family these important things. And I would like it to be mainly the men. However, we have to deal with the reality of what some people call abuela theology. Again, my pronunciation's not good. The idea is grandma. Now, is that how I want it or what it should be? No, but is sometimes grandma the sort of most spiritual leader, matron of the family? Yeah. And so maybe we got to figure out a way within a complementarian mentality, which I embrace, to have grandma be able to teach these things and do these things within her family situation. Because I think this will help whole families attend and be interested. And then also it helps with the personal relationship. And that's another important thing. We need to find ways to bring together relational engagement and apologetics encounters. So Renee Aguirre of the University reminds us that when it comes to ministry meetings, we shouldn't just ask what type of we shouldn't just ask all the questions we might ask. Instead, here's what we should ask. What type of relational engagement do Latinos need for this meeting? How can they grow in knowing each other better? Those are good questions, by the way. Now, Renee initially was talking about leaders, but I think that's a good way to look at it in general, not just how much time do I plan for this. So this is a wise set of questions to ask for any Latino context apologetics engagement. So I have some ideas with this I'm going to work on executing. For example, this fall, 12, it may be a different number once it ends up getting all said and done. A 12-part apologetics theme series meeting in my house. It's a more of a relational environment, and more folks, I think, will take part. Now, there's the challenge of space, but I'll approach families with teens and college-age kids first, and I'll have Mexican food. And a kickback time. It's got to be included with music in the background. So a little bit different, but that's what I'm working on right now. Okay. Windelin says, it's not far. You're talking about Peralta from Albuquerque. It's on Isla Pueblo. I need to drive slow. Population 3,400. Might be Baptist Church still standing. Yeah, there are some churches still sitting there. Lots of talking. Man, no one's clicked on the link yet. Come on through, people. Come on through. You're invited. Okay. Another thing we can do as we talk about the intersection of Latino apologetics and the Latino church is highlight Latino apologists, theologians, and even biblically robust content creators. Let me give an example of this. Small example, but let's go. Because we want to look for ways to help move Latino Christians to be able to experience enrichment in the apologetics arena. How? Showcase individuals in relevant fields. There's a millennial gal I met once in LA at an apologetics conference, Brittany Valadez. She holds an MA in apologetics from Bio. She interviewed Manny Sandoval. Who's that? He's a Guatemalan American filmmaker, and she did this on her YouTube channel. Well, who's Manny Sandoval? He's the guy that did Case for Heaven. Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel wrote a book called The Case for Heaven, which gets into NDEs, near-death experiences, and things like that. Lee Strobel is the most successful apologetics author on the planet. Manny Sandoval is a filmmaker. There's the brother on the right. And he got his whole family involved. And other people you normally wouldn't see associated in an apologetics venture. Steve Caballero, Miel San Marcos, members of the Luis Palau family, his own family, Daniel and Gil. A number of people involved. If you go through the IMDb credits, Latinos involved in every area of this. This is apologetics content. So this is a great thing to highlight. And I didn't even know this till I started doing some research. Now I want to watch the film or the documentary. It's mainly like a kind of a documentary. The film was a financial success in 2023. And so you do have examples of Latino Protestants involved in apologetics creation. Now, that's not it. You've also got a number of apologetics books. Now, this is branching out a little bit, that have been translated into Spanish. Now, I understand I'm mainly dealing with English dominant nonetheless, understand. But you do have that, and that's important. Okay. So, when you go on Facebook, you find some fascinating things that you may not have known about that I want to share. So let me real quick go over to this. Here we go. It's just going to work. It's not going to work. Okay, hold on. Let me flip this up. Oh, boy. No, we don't want that. We don't want that. Did the audio just change, or is the audio okay? Shout out to German Brother and Matthew. Can you give me a brief explanation of today's topic? Yes, I certainly can, and I'm glad that you asked today's topic. This is a deep dive into Latino Protestant history, culture, and the future of apologetics in Hispanic churches. So I got some insights from this research paper that I did, and the insights deal with how to build a culturally contextualized apologetics ministry in an urban Latino church. We're looking at stats, case studies, and practical ideas specifically from Phoenix, West Phoenix. And so we're trying to get some ideas here as we move forward in this. Hey, that's all right. You're allowed to ask. I don't mind that. I don't mind running it down. And if you ask, probably not the only one. All right, now let me share the screen here. Check this out. Okay. Let me flip this around a little bit. There we go. Society de Apologistas Latinos. You know, there's a Society of Latino Apologists. Did you know Cross-Examine has resources in Espanol? There's my man Jorge Gil. Good brother. taught me how to take better care of my beard. He's not the only one. Juan Valdez, I met him a number of times, and notice they've got these different interviews, which is pretty cool. Let me make sure I hit that like button. And they do conferences and get-togethers, and I bet you didn't know stuff like this existed. Well, it does, and it's pretty cool, and I'm going to contend this is like the future in a lot of ways of apologetics in the United States. In the United States, this is going to become more and more important. And isn't it beautiful? There's Antonio Cruz and a number of other gentlemen. Isn't it beautiful that this kind of stuff exists? Yeah, baby. Check this out. Enjoy. They're even getting into intelligent design stuff with that. So here's some of the conferences and that they got going on. So I could just keep on going down the list. Academy. Tacticas. Okay, you're getting the idea, right? Pretty cool, man. Pretty cool. Okay, let me flip back over here. So the idea here is sort of awareness, okay? That's part of what we're doing here. And we want to highlight these types of things. Now, here's another idea I think that is practical. Is appeal to the moral obligation to grow in knowledge, wisdom, and proclamation. Ismael Garcia says, quote, many Hispanic Protestants are scriptural legalists. This is the scholars who emphasize rights and duties as the core of their moral obligations. And most Hispanic Protestants have a preference for acting morally out of a sense of duty. Now, this gets into culturally relevant things. If there's any validity to this notion, however crass it may be stated, even though it's a scholar, which I suspect there is some validity to this notion, then it's helpful to keep this in mind when inviting people to partake in apologetics engagement. For example, what about a call to action that appeals to your gospel duty or Christian duty? I think that it can increase buy-in. The problem is this appeal is often abused, especially by one of the problems within Latino Protestantism, the prosperity gospel. So I'm not advocating this, and look at 1 Peter 5 to see why not, the way he exhorts his fellow elders there. But I think duty can be properly utilized in a way that conforms to gospel truth. And you can see this with the scriptures that I got referenced there on the screen. They could be employed to encourage church members to do what? Grow. It's a duty. It's prescribed. So we got a duty to grow in what? True wisdom. This is a way to work in apologetics and theologically robust content and to make people sort of interested. It's your duty as a Christian man to lead your household, and you need to be able to provide your children with some form of answers, not just about how to fix a V8, but about how to answer questions about what they believe is eternally true. Come to this class. Here's another idea. Healthy patterns, instituting theological rituals and liturgy in daily life. Now, some of these are experimental ideas I've got, okay? Because not all of this was, like, already there. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I had to, you know, kind of come up with some of this, huh? You know? Gwendolyn says, a friend of mine has a church in her home. Would love to attend it, but it's in Spanish. Her husband's pastor. Maybe I'll go. She's a friend. Let me know how it is. Yeah, Truth Defenders. It is the same name. Juan Valdez. It's an older reference, by the way. So this tells us, you know, we're all telling our age, but yeah. It's true. Okay. Now, there sometimes can be an expectation or at least allowance for some form of ritual among Latino Christians, perhaps owing to the fact of coming out of Roman Catholicism. Now, if that's the case, is there a way to properly energize that for gospel truths, for good theological habits? I think so. One simple way is to introduce the Apostles' Creed into the service. every Sunday. Now, I understand there's more formal congregations that do this, but within the Protestant community of the Latino charismatics, they don't, in general, do that kind of thing. But things like that could help you, over time, develop a more theologically robust congregation. These are little things, little by little. What about sort of what we might call private rituals? Now, I understand they're not usually phrased that way. They're phrased as spiritual disciplines. But yes, Bible reading and prayer. They're supposed to be standard habits for the Christian, but they're often not. We understand that. And I think that could be discussed as a way of, hey, daily do this. As a regular practice, do this. Make this part of your routine. I think that could be a good thing. Now, this takes leadership and this takes repetition from the leadership to communicate these ideas. None of these are easy, but we're talking about forming our congregations for health, because the fact is the younger people are getting de-churched. They are walking away. C says amen, and Nate says he's happy I said the word duty. Well, we see who's spiritual in the live chat and who's not. I'm just teasing Nate. I'm glad something could entertain you, my brother. I hope I could do some more things to entertain you. Maybe some sounds could entertain you, such as... So keep on going here. What about instituting the Lord's table more often than Protestants tend to do? No, I'm not talking about Mass. But a lot of time, us Protestants are pretty weak on the table. Presbyterians do better. Reformed Baptists do great. I think this is healthy if it's coupled with theological explanations of what is happening. If the ritual, and I'm using that sort of a loose way to describe the Lord's table, if the ritual is theologically properly explained and it's part of the lifeblood of the congregation, I think that's a good thing. That can have some helpful results. Now, look, I'm not just saying, oh, do it because this will help people understand the gospel better, although that's good. So it's a pragmatic thing, like as if the Lord's table is not an end into itself, because it is an end into itself. Understand? What's the end into itself? The fact that Jesus told us to do this. Now, he didn't tell us how much, but this is a spiritual discipline that I believe is healthy and helpful, spiritually speaking. Once a month ain't bad. What about more? I could see twice a month. But the time must be redeemed by explaining the meaning every time, or else it's just another empty ritual like something like Mass. Now, what about this idea? Can we offer more opportunities in our Latino congregations for chances for testimonies that are guided to be theologically more robust than just, here's what I want to say about my big toe, or apologetically geared, such as I witnessed to my Jehovah's Witness neighbor? Yes, I think we can. As a boy in charismatic churches, testimonies were a big part of it. If you grew up in a charismatic church, I know you've heard a lot of testimonies. A lot of churches have gotten away from it, and one of the reasons is because people be getting weird up there, and now it's on the internet. Before, it used to be like, you hear what Sister Susie said? Yo, she was wild when she was telling us about what she used to do. Now it's on the internet, and you got some video where someone puts music behind it, you know, and repeats what this person said about what they used to do, you know, and is not always very much of a good look. Victory Outreach is well known for featuring testimonies as a tool in evangelistic outreach. If I could be honest, some of my friends, we used to kind of even tease how ridiculous this got. For example, we would kind of tease that sometimes in these testimonials, it was almost like a chance to give glory for how bad you were in your past life. Oh, I sent 10 men to the hospital. Amen. And I gave them severe bruises. Amen. They had lacerations even on their liver. Amen. You're like, nah, Vocab, bro. I have heard testimonies almost exactly like that. I'm not joking. I'm not making this up. And you realize, man, this is like, you're just bragging about you being bad. And it's like, oh, I used to have all the fine honeys, but not anymore. I don't do that anymore. Oh, man, I had this dope, sweet car, and I was rolling in my Cherry, but not anymore. I don't do that anymore. You know, it's like, bro, I had a friend from Echo Park named Sal, and he had seen a lot of that. And so my man Sal, now I don't think he should have done this, but I respect his move. He would tend not to share his testimony, even though he came out of the Echo Park lifestyle. That's in LA, for those who don't know. Man, 6'3", 330 pounds, lived the life legitimately that a lot of people claim they lived, but he lived it for real. But he didn't like to share his testimony because he would always say, I don't want to give glory to the devil, brother. I don't want to give glory to the devil. He was at a point in his journey as a young believer where he didn't know how to talk about his past without in a way that seemed like he was bragging about it. So he just opted to not speak about it. You know? Fascinating, right? Once a month, okay. Yep, you know about the testimonial service, and you know about some of those old testimonies. Folks often confuse the testimony of what the Lord has done for them with glorifying the past in their lives. Yeah. And look, we're humans. I get it. But here's what I'm saying. Is there a way to redeem that? Is there, for example, once a month I attend a small group at Denny's that's like a apologetics group. It's called Arizona Apologetics. Cool folks in there. They're lay apologists. And we don't always do this, but one of the things that we do is we go around and share an apologetics encounter we had that month. Now, what about if we did that with the testimonial times? It wasn't just about what you used to do when you were an unbeliever. What about a recent thing where it doesn't have to be some radical story? Just, I shared the gospel, and here's what I said, and I felt the Lord leading in this way. You see what I'm saying? A regulated testimonial time. I think that's create opportunities for apologetics in community. The way it could work practically is you approach a few members, kind of like stronger people in the beginning, tell them the concept, ask them to write up some bullet points for like a little story almost about God's grace in their life, but at least one theological point that's connected directly and explicitly to a Bible verse. Leadership can essentially coach people, not telling them what to say, but to include witnessing encounters as well, and then sneak in some apologetics points. Now, why is this related to Latino apologetics? Because it's relationally driven. It's not just teach. Latino culture is highly relational. A lot of it is theology via story and what's sometimes called cultures of orality. These are cultural traits. And so the testimony could be a good place to have that in there because we're getting to know each other better and all that kind of stuff. I think this is good. Consider. Wendelin says, good point. I see Hispanics all the time and never thought about a need for Hispanic apologists. Maybe I didn't say it, but my church is about 30% Hispanic and non-denominational church. So yeah, you're in New Mexico, so that makes sense. And my guess is, Wendelin, you're going to see those numbers increase and even more and more churches increase. Yes, there's Latino churches, but the less and less that Spanish becomes an issue, and it's becoming less and less of an issue, of a dividing line, because obviously Spanish is beautiful. What I'm saying is if you have one group that doesn't speak Spanish and one that does, even if they're all Latino, it's limited what they can do together, but it's becoming less and less of an issue because you have more and more English dominant, and I'm not making comment on that's good or bad. It's just part of sort of the Americanization process for everybody. I mean, how many Italians know any Italian? When you go to Italy, and you're Italian, they make fun of the way Italians speak because they shorten everything. This showed up actually in the issue of The Sopranos once. It's kind of funny. They're like, what are you saying? It sounds like baby talk to them. Same thing with the French and the Cajuns. I talked to the French about this once when I was in a place called Grenoble, and they thought it was funny because they would meet Cajuns and they'd be so excited of their French ancestry and try to speak to them French, and the French told me he was so excited I didn't want to disappoint him, but I had no idea what he was saying. It sounded like baby talk. So anyways, the point is, it's sort of the way things go. Now, what's another idea? This is the last idea I'm going to share, coming full circle. This relates to church history. Can we teach church history and the global historical church? Can we teach it and treat it as a subject that's not just merely academic, but a way for us to look at our extended family? Because we can never undervalue the importance of family, La Familia, and Latino culture, which is a good thing, by the way. Maybe we could learn more about this. Ruben Armendariz writes about this. I like this. Listen to this. The Hispanic Protestant congregation can be accurately described as a family group. The congregation looks and behaves as an extended family, which is characteristic of families in Hispanic culture. Here, the elder members of the extended family take on importance attributed to both heroes or saints and commitment to the family. They're labeled heroes if they are who have been, if they are deceased, or who continue to be if they are still living, pillars and inspiration to younger generations. Oftentimes, the heroes or saints are pastors who are revered and who take on the role of father figure, end quote. And by the way, let me just show you real quick what that quote's from. That's from the Protestant book right here. My chair is making a lot of noise. Lots of noise. This book right here, which is a pretty helpful book, by the way. That's where that quote is from. So, I hold that a massive part of apologetics defense is a basic grasp on seminal events in church history. You can't hardly go online and find an attack on Christianity that doesn't criticize the Council of Nicaea. So we could frame church history as getting to know your extended family better, regardless of race or ethnicity or language. It could be a potential inlet for a Latino congregation to become more engaged, because it can sound all very foreign and strange, right? Now, I'm going to preach Reformation Sunday 2025, and I'm going to try to emphasize this approach, try to tie this in with Hebrews 12:1, which refers to a great cloud of witnesses who have gone before us. There's even a subtle verse in 1 Peter 3:6 where Peter calls Christian women Gentiles. I'm sorry, I didn't phrase that right. Peter calls Christian women who are Gentiles daughters of Sarah. In 1 Peter 3:6, if you have a mixed congregation there, which I hold that you do, and I'm not alone in this, then he's referring to them all as daughters of Sarah. And so these figures are our ancestors, whether they're ethnically related or not. And you can see that in John 1:13. You understand what I'm saying by that? I hope so. So we just wanted to have a little discussion tonight, kind of experimental, right? To propose a culturally contextualized apologetics and theology ministry that addresses faith challenges while recognizing the unique cultural features of Latino communities. This is contextualized apologetics. We barely scratched the surface. I'm going to implement some of these ideas in my context over the next 12 months, and I hope to return to this. Specifically, I'd like to get into the generally high view of the supernatural. That's something that's real. And an awareness of syncretic occultic spirituality. You know, C says maybe a formatted Dr. Phil. I know that was from an earlier comment, though. So in regards to the testimonial service. Yeah. Tina. Testimony service is just a way to get up and sing. So we're trying to figure if there's a way to not throw that away, because I think it could be helpful, especially more. Because, look, a lot of, waspy types, they're like, why is this person talking? What's going on? Why do I need to hear from them? Now, I get it. Sometimes they go on too long, and that could be a case. But what I'm saying is, it's not as recognized that, hey, this is part of our family. We're getting to know them better. And these are things that help build in there. That's more of the Latino Protestants I got on there on the screen. Just reminding you. Hanging out with Mike Lacona there. All right, we'll take a more look at those later. So, wrapping this all up, this was not a be-all, end-all. The idea here was just sort of dipping our toe in the water. And shout out to everybody who came in with all different perspectives. I do wish somebody would have jumped on live, but not yet. But maybe we can do a smoke room soon and make it a little bit more of a formal thing. The idea here was to dip our toe in the water and explore some of these ideas, because this is going to become an increasingly important element in the future of our cities and of this country, and we've got to consider and think about these things, because there's more to get into here, but I even have stumbled across what I think is a very helpful metaphor, and it's the idea of people who live in the hyphen, like the Hellenized Jews did, and Latino apologists can act in that way. Now, that's a whole other thing. But let me end the show with a few book recommendations. This is called On the Move. This is a good one. A History of Hispanic Church in the United States, another book from the good old Phoenix Seminary Library. Intentional by D.A. Horton, who himself is part Latino. Kingdom, Ethnicity, and the Divided World. Good book. This one I don't know about, Brown Faces, White Spaces, but I wanted to get the different perspectives. I'm not signing off on this, but I'm getting different perspective. This is not exactly my perspective, but I want to understand it. This is the most practical one, my favorite one so far. Hispanic realities impacting America. A little dated because this stuff is moving fast, but implications for evangelism and missions. Daniel Sanchez, great one. Another good one is the future of the Latino church in America, I think is what it's called. Daniel Rodriguez. That one's off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that. A number of other resources the guy's sitting behind here, but we don't want to go all day on that. Yo, Ham Sunshine coming in. God bless you. Christ alone, no Rome. God bless you as well. And testimony, great way to be encouraged. Exactly. Knowing what God has done in people's lives. Yeah, exactly. And see, it also could be a faith encouraging and strengthening thing, which is part of what we're trying to fix and deal with when we talk about the issues we talked about tonight. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming in.